I am not that prepared. I am prepared in so much as I watch. I took notes this time. My God. But I watched it and watched Behind and then Beneath. And then we started Escape last night. Anyway, it's fine. But yeah, I should have some background here. At the very least, it'll be a challenge to shut me up about the Planet of the Apes. So
excellent. That's perfect. And this movie is more coherent than the one you brought to us last time, so it should be easier.
Yeah, sure is.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the.
Perfect. Beautiful.
Nailed it.
Just ate my tongue right there.
Art.
Welcome to Certain POVs, Another Pass podcast with Case and Sam. This week is the 5th episode, so we're talking about a movie that overcame adversity. Let's celebrate the creativity of the filmmakers.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Another Pass podcast. I am Case Aiken, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Sam Alisea.
Hi.
Sam, we have been talking about the Planet of the Apes franchise for the last 4 episodes. And today is finally the day when we're going to be talking about the reason why this franchise exists.
And listen, this is a good reason for the franchise to exist. However, this has been a journey. It has been a journey watching these movies in reverse order. And I almost want to tell people, just watch it in reverse order, because honestly, you're saving the best for last. It won't make sense to you, but that doesn't matter. It shouldn't have to.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, like, a person who's unfamiliar with the franchise starting with Battle is going to be very confused. But when they get to this movie, man, is it a treat.
Yeah.
It is a treat that has created a franchise that has gone on for so many fucking movies. Like, just 9 fucking movies in this franchise. And then 2 TV shows. So much stuff. It's amazing. Comic books, like, huge franchise. And it's touched a lot of people. It's been great to have so many guests to talk about their experience with the franchise. And so for today, for talking about the original movie, The Planet of the Apes, we are joined by Paul Kaminski.
Hello. I'm very honored. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah. Well, you took offense online when you found out that we were doing a regular Another Pass episode at Escape.
Which I would consider a perfect movie under normal circumstances.
It's pretty close. It's really good.
It's really good. Yeah.
Well, you see, I'm a seeker too. There's got to be a better movie out there. That's a little illusion, but yeah, of the bunch, like that's kind of a pun. But 3 and this one are probably the best. I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
with 4 close second.
Exactly. That's pretty much where I come down on it. My buzz term was that tied for last is the Burton, Battle, and Beneath, and like I think the retrospective of this has made me put Battle above the other 2. Really, it goes Battle, Burton, Beneath in that order for me now.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, we're on the exact same page. Yeah, I mean, Battle. Only one of those films has Paul Williams in it, so I guess you put that one above the others. That man hangs out with fucking Muppets. Okay, so
by default, no one can change this order now.
That's right.
It is official.
It's official.
Right, and then I just feel uncomfortable necessarily putting the circus movies in the same lineup, although I guess I would arguably put OG Planet of the Apes, because it's also the OG, like you can't really have this franchise without it, at the top, and I think it's a classic, and it's wonderful, and even the things that haven't necessarily aged as well are forgivable, because it's still this, like, incredible work from the 60s, and then we get the circus movies, in which I can kind of go back and forth on which one I like the most of them, but I like them all together, and I like them all individually. They're all great. Probably Escape falls right underneath them. Escape can sometimes come above it because I do find it so charming, but it's also dark as fuck at the end.
God, it's so brutal. I was telling my wife last night, who, by the way, was very annoyed at the both of you for bringing apes into the TV screen in our lives.
We're sorry.
I was telling Case over our chat that I tend to be aggressively interested in things, and this is one of those things I am aggressively interested in. And sometimes I will fall into an ape rabbit hole that my wife just cannot stand. But
this is things that are true for both of us.
I was telling her last night. I was like, yeah, because we had started Escape. We actually watched Beneath last night. She was like, what is this bullshit? I was like, I know, right? But it does have its moments, Beneath. But Escape is genuinely very good. And I was telling her that, like, when I was a kid, it really disturbed me when Zira and spoiler alert, when Zira and Cornelius die horribly at the end. And like Cornelius is choking on his own blood before he falls over a banister rail and cracks in half. It's like, she's like, and they made you cover your eyes during the boob scene in Titanic? I was like, yeah, I know. And yet I was left alone with this.
You were let to sit with your feelings about this. That's totally fine. Watching people get brutally murdered.
Those poor monkeys. They died pretty horribly.
And their child, as far as you could tell. And even with the switcheroo, it still doesn't matter. They still just murdered a child, like, regardless of how smart the child was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely like the what's so brilliant about Escape, and we will definitely talk about this film because it's like, and we talked about this when we did the episode, is that it mimics so many great moments from this film without feeling like they're retelling the story. It's just like a reverse mirror, but they do it so well. And like the court scene in this film and the court scene in that film are very similar. And so it's one of the things that makes Escape so brilliant, because one of the things that Charlton Heston in this movie says is that the reason he goes on this expedition is because there must be something better out there than man, right? And so he definitely finds out that no, there's a whole race of beings that are just as bad, just still like hiding the truth and things like that. And then you get in Escape to see how bad humans behave anyway. So it just kind of reinforces this Heston, like, anti-people, anti-social, like, just socializing, period. I like that he's a grump. It's one of my favorite things about his character.
Yeah, it's this rewatch, particularly going into the second and third movies. It's interesting to me this time around. I noticed the similarities between Taylor and Dr. Zaius much more clearly than I've ever noticed before. They're really very similar. They're kind of two sides of the same coin, and they're both kind of right about most things usually in the movie. I mean, plot-wise, whenever there's a character that's right about something, it's actually usually Dr. Zaius or Taylor. And in the case of Dr. Zaius, when he talks, he's like grilling, I know we're going to get into the movie, but there's a point where he's grilling Taylor about where's your tribe? And Taylor's like, you're nuts. There is no tribe. But there was a fucking tribe. That's what the whole second movie's about. So it is kind of interesting just how right and similar those two characters are. And it made actually my favorite scene in this movie be that closed door sort of let's drop the charade and have a conversation scene between Taylor and Zaius. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie now, which it never was before.
Yeah, I mean, Zaius is such a villain that you love to hate, and is so interesting at how awful he is without being wrong most of the time. Like, the worst things he gets wrong are like the specifics. It's usually not the broad strokes of anything. Like, is there a tribe out there? Like you said, for one thing, there is. But for another, like, even in this scenario, like where you only have this movie and it's just like, well, yeah, Taylor. I mean, he was right about humans, and Taylor, honestly, kind of agreed about humans. Mm-hmm. Like, all the realists are lockstep with each other. It's just one person's in power and the other person's not.
Yeah, it's a great moment when they first crash. And I forget which one he's talking to. I don't think it's Landon, or maybe it is. The guy, the astronaut who's like sad about everything. The one who buries the flag.
Oh, in the rocks. Yeah. And he starts, first of all, that scene with the laugh is so iconic. Yeah. Like, it's just so, like, it is a living meme, honestly. It would be memed the heck out of, I mean, there are gifs of it too, but, like, honestly, like, if this came out, like, now, people would be sharing that everywhere. It would be that. That would be the reaction to lots of things. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's funny. He's like, I miss my friends and family. And Charlton Heston's like, you stupid son of a bitch. Your friends and family probably sucked anyway. Let's go walk around these fucking rocks. It's like,
I just love that he's like, they've been dead for 700 years. Stop missing them. As if he hasn't just come to the realization. Like they may have been dead, but like, I just figured that out, buddy. Like,
Well, figured out is sort of the other. Before we get too deep into this, because like I had a lot of thoughts when watching it this time in this circumstance, at this point in my life, because we've talked a lot about how the franchise hits different now than it did even 5 years ago in terms of some of the stuff that we see. But Paul, I do want to ask, like, what is the starting point for your interest in this franchise? Like, what is your experience of the franchise as a whole? Like you said, you're aggressively into it, which I relate. But like,
yeah,
like, do you remember when you first were introduced to it? How you were introduced to it?
Yeah, I got a lot of science fiction from my dad as a kid, so that's where Star Trek comes from, and this and Lost in Space. I didn't quite glom onto Lost in Space with the fervor of Star Trek and Apes, but I got a lot from him. So from a very young age, this franchise was in my life, and because the three of us are, we're not alive when these movies were coming out, so it was already a thing. So you could always just digest the whole package at once. It was like the original Star Wars movies, where by the time I was old enough to appreciate them, the three of them were out already and had been dormant for a while. So you could kind of take it as a whole and stuff. But no kids in my class or anything were watching those things. Nobody was watching, Star Wars because it was old at that time. We're talking Lucas fiddling with them era. And no one was watching Planet of the Apes because it had been ages. But I had a Cornelius doll in my room just up there next to the Mego, Captain Kirk and Cornelius and stuff. And it was very representative to these two franchises, which, by the way, share a lot of kinship with each other in that they came out around the same time. I mean, Star Trek starts up in 66 for real. Apes starts filming in 67. And they're both smart pieces of science fiction that have just that little edge of low budgety to it. We're not talking 2001 here, although I would argue the apes in Planet of the Apes look way better than the apes in 2001. But there's an element of camp, it's just on the periphery, but it's smart enough where you don't feel like a dum-dum for enjoying it. And actually probably set the tone for a lot of what I enjoy in media just in general. It's like having something to say, but doing it in an over-the-top kind of arguably ridiculous at times way with intricate continuity. So that checks all my boxes right off. Just,
are there time travel shenanigans? Yes. Like, is headcanon required to understand this franchise? Yeah.
Check. And that leads to comic books and all this. So that's sort of the basis for my media consumption just in general. And then, like a lot of kids, I put down these franchises when I was in middle school because I didn't want to get beat up. But then in high school, I really found myself like embracing these things. Like I had pictures of Admiral Kirk on my locker kind of thing. But I was able to feel like I owned it sort of in a weird way. And the same thing with Apes. So as an adult, I've just grown to love these franchises more and more because they age so well. I mean, obviously, we'll talk about how this movie doesn't exactly pass the Bechdel test, but that aside, like they still hold up pretty damn well, this and Star Trek. So that's where I come at Apes. And so I love them dearly and go through periods of watching them and was so impressed when those Matt Reeves movies, and well, I guess I forget who directed that Rise movie, but I was so impressed when those movies came out because I could not believe, speaking of intricate continuity, that of all the things they could pick up, they pick up the story of Caesar from 4 and 5. I was so impressed with that decision. I was just like, oh my God. Because not only are they picking it up, but they did it in this really interesting, unique way. I don't know. I was just really, really impressed with. So that's my Apes background. And I make a lot of monkey noises that my wife can't stand.
There are moments where you and I are just like too similar. The amount of times my wife gets mad about like me knuckle walking up the stairs or just making random chest thumps.
When my daughter was born and I was doing the Nova, she's like, you can't. Our child's first word will not be Nova. Okay. It's just
get your paws off me.
It's good times.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like the franchise, like this is a franchise that has, fortunately, with the circus movies, it has really been additive to everything. We've talked every time so far about my feelings that like it creates actually a perfect like addition to the chronology of like, well, this is the story first, and then Charlton Heston arrives, Taylor arrives in the future, and then that prompts the time travel back, and that creates the splintered timeline of escape and so forth. But it all still fits together, and like it's so easy to glom on once you ignore the specifics, like the fact that some of the dates don't line up in any of the movies. The fact that the names that they recall as being like, our legends tell us this. What fucking legends, first of all, and why is the legend different each movie? But like once you get past that, the franchise is just so damn strong. And then you have the Burton one, which at least the makeup is incredible. Yeah. And you end up with like this wonderful, like, again, 9-movie series.
Admittedly, I don't go back to that Burton one often, although I'm sort of perversely happy it exists because, like you say, it is the only time you'll see makeup like that on people like Michael Clark Duncan playing the gorilla general and stuff. And that's kind of really when I was rewatching Beneath yesterday, I was thinking, well, the only thing I think this movie gave us appreciably additive to the franchise was Ursus. And that's kind of it. Because everything else you get in the first film anyway. And I could have done without the mutants at all. Like, I don't know what your diagnosis at the end for could have used another pass was, but I would have cut the mutants completely.
We brought that up as a possibility.
Just because it's such a weird left turn and doesn't add anything to the story, just complicates things a little bit. But yeah, Ursus was a great addition, and that has maintained throughout the franchise, right? The gorillas, I mean, not that they weren't warlike and aggressive and stuff in this first one, but I think it was Ursus that really put a face to it and stuff, and that continued on throughout the rest of the franchise.
Yeah, a central violent figure that stands out from Zaius, and is specifically like the gorilla side, like a villain for the gorillas specifically, and not just orangutans holding back information while subjugating the rest of society. It showed like, well, here is, if you indoctrinate and feed all this like right-wing bullshit to a large group of people who are in working class, and also make their only means of elevation in society be through violence and through the military, then like that might not be great.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
The people you produce might not be the best people, and I think that's really interesting, and I think that is a good part of Beneath that I kept saying for Beneath, and like also for the Burton one, like it would be really nice just to have like a good scenario where we could see gorillas as being truly scary in this setting, and the limitations of having humans in makeup just never really worked in the original 5.
For the scariness, you mean?
For the scariness, yeah. And you don't want that towards the end. Like I would find like Aldo in battle, like he should be much more sympathetic, because this is where the society is starting to splinter as it's being formed in the first place. And so you kind of want him to have some more redeeming qualities than ultimately he gets, because he's an Ursus retread at that point, to the point where they even have like costume pieces that are like shared between the two.
Yeah.
And that's a budget thing as much as anything else. But yeah, like because it's all just building on this really like great framework of, like you said, it's a little campy, it's a little silly, but it has so much to say that you can then start adapting it to say more and more things about our society, because the whole point is that it's apes and they're like literally aping human society and doing sort of this like approximation of it as they observe, rather than like creating something of their own. And like that becomes the lens for us to look at things. And that's why this first movie is so good. Like, you know, the book is fine. Like it's been a while since I read it. I read it back in high school when I was like on one of my tears about being obsessed with this, probably like when the DVDs came out. Because, you know, you hyperfixate on something for a while, and then a couple years later, you're like, oh, right, that was really fun to hyperfixate on. Let me hyperfixate on it again.
Cheaper than medication, right?
Exactly. So, like, I went through a phase somewhere around junior high, and then the DVDs came out, so that was probably, like, late high school, early college, where I was like, oh, yeah, fuck, right, I love these things. And around that time, I read the book. And the book is is fine. Like, I get, like, it's a bit more just, like, raw satire, because the whole society is, like, advanced, and, like, it's honestly less scary than the movie makes it. And you can really see, then, the Rod Serling fingerprint when you get to the movie. Like, that transition into making it this sort of, like this is a Twilight Zone movie. Even if it wasn't supposed to be a Twilight Zone movie, it's a Rod Serling initial script, even if it's been retouched like crazy. And like the reveal of the apes, the fact that it takes 30 minutes to get to the
32
apes,
minutes and 10 seconds.
Which is insane almost, because it's called Planet of the Apes.
Yeah.
So you're standing there watching beautiful vistas. I mean, gorgeous. I mean, it is a beautifully shot movie. But there are no apes for 32 minutes on the planet of the apes.
Yeah, that was another thing I noticed this time around. Speaking of things that came from this recent rewatch, was I was watching it really through the lens of a really long Twilight Zone episode because for some reason, I don't know, I never really dwelled on the Rod Serling of it all, but yeah, it really does scan like that. There is one, and maybe the movie would be impossible to get around this, but there is one leap of logic that makes it one step below like a proper Twilight Zone, is that, and it's a stupid thing to even bring up, but the fact that Taylor never questions the English language, I know it's stupid to bring up, but because in the end it doesn't matter at all. But if this was a proper Twilight Zone, I feel like they would have addressed it at least, because I can sort of rationalize that the English language survived with the monkeys through the Holocaust. Like I can kind of rationalize that. It's probably not likely, but I can rationalize it. But the fact that Taylor doesn't address it at all and just seems to roll with it was one that jumped out to me. Like, I wonder where that got lost along the way or something like that. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, like, because the fact that it's still English should be an Easter egg just for like if the twist of it being still Earth, but then also part of it is that it even speaks to the fact that the apes are not creative in the same way that humans are, or at least that's as a bulk society. Like, it's very explicit in the book that chimpanzees are the first to like really make advancements and not just copy everything that they've been doing for forever. And so it makes sense that it like language evolves normally, and the fact that these apes have learned a language and are so iconoclastic, like they're so locked into everything, it will not change, like, because they cannot let it change, because that's all they know how to do. They don't know how to make new terms for things. They can just keep using the old ones about right. Yeah.
I never thought of it that way. That's a great rationalization. Still wish Taylor would have been in. Why are you all speaking English?
Yeah, Taylor should have thought about
it. But yeah, no. It's a weird thing.
Yeah, because I also looked at this movie for this particular time from the lens of, is this just a Twilight Zone episode? And it really works very well if you think of it in that framework. Like, you know, the astronauts traveling through the California desert is like super Twilight Zone like staples. Like, so many episodes are like, yep, we're just like out here in California, and if it was black and white, it would look just the same as all those other movies. There are points in the movie that really feel like there should be commercial breaks, specifically right after Taylor says the "Get your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty apes."
Yeah.
And like, it's a great moment. There's great musical score, or this huge swell that occurs right there. The look on Zero is perfect. Cut to commercial should happen right there.
Yeah, actually, cut to commercial. Yes, I was also thinking of it like a play. It seemed to have the cadence of a play in that way, where it was almost like that's where the curtain would fall, and then you pick it up again or something. It's such a dead stop, dead start. That I don't know if the person who did the screenplay had any background in theater, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, it also comes at about the exact halfway spot, and that makes it like even more so this whole like, yep, we're like, here's the paradigm shift right there, like the act 1 act 2 kind of structure to it, which is different than the way a lot of screenplays really work, and because Taylor as a speaking individual is in that society is such a shift to what the dynamics of everyone's relationships are. It's just a very dramatic, like the first half is one and then the second half is a totally different thing. But yeah, like, man, fuck, I just love this movie. Rewatching it, like, so a thing I've noticed as I've gotten older is when I try to rewatch a movie from the perspective of someone who doesn't have cultural knowledge going into it, it has really opened my eyes to like how some things have been paced really well. Like, I think that 30-minute burn of them just being on the planet by itself with like much less score or like these a lot of mystery, and at first it's just arid and it's bland and like they're barely surviving, but it's like, you know, there's some action that, you know, we get the crash landing, we get them like escaping the ship, and then it's just this featureless desert that they're in, but we know that there's water and that they're able to survive, and bare minimum. And you spend a lot of time with these characters who I tend not to think about the other astronauts very much when I think about the franchise as a whole, but then looking at this movie and being like, oh, these are very important characters for the story of Taylor.
You do spend actually a lot more time with them than you think, right? Because like we think of like the memes and the get your hands off me, you dirty apes, and him being sprayed by water later on. Like these are the things that kind of stick with you, but what his team offers in those first 30 minutes is it kind of tells you exactly who Taylor is. Just a big old grump. But it also, like, you're watching these humans struggle to survive, right? Like, yeah, Taylor's, like, hardened and he's like, get over it. But you've got, like, these aspects of humanity, right? You've got his one astronaut friend who is so sad about everything. And then you've got the real scientist who right away, he goes and he collects dirt. He starts taking samples, like let's figure out where we are, when we are, what we're doing, what kind of soil we're on. We've got to find water. We've got to find land. It's like these three different explorers, an explorer who wanted the clout, an explorer who just wants to find something else because he thinks humans are shit, and that's Taylor. And then you've got the real scientist, right? And so you kind of like get this idea of like this exceptionalism, like these guys, like, someone just wanted a statue of himself, but I just wanted to get the fuck away from that and find something better. And it's very interesting because it's also talking about like the exceptionalism, right? American exceptionalism. And what are the different types of people who are like these explorers that we look up to? Because Taylor's not the least likely hero of the three. He's the only one that survives. But, like, there's one guy, right, the crier. I'm just going to call him the baby because I don't remember his name.
It's Landon and Dodge.
Oh, Landon.
That's right. Landon is the one who's, like, he wanted to be the hero. He's the one who wants the statue.
So he wants the statue.
And he contributes nothing to the party.
Yeah. He's just emotional. He's just kind of like, and he's there as a golden boy. He's always been exceptional. And when they gave him the honor of going on this test mission, he took it because, for humanity, but really for his vanity, right? And then you've got a true scientist and like...
Dodge.
There should be something. I mean, like, it is so... Because when I was rewatching it, like, I remember the scene, like, when I was younger, seeing Dodge, and I'd be like, oh, no! But now, as an adult, like, I was hit even harder, and I was like, oh, fuck. Like, all Dodge wanted to do was collect some soil, make some discoveries. Yeah. Like, it really, like, because it also feels like Taylor, a curmudgeon, he has a respect for Dodge that he does not have for Landon. Oh,
absolutely.
And so we also have a respect for this character because, like, he's an explorer. He's like he wants to discover things. He thinks that this is bettering things, and that's what we aspire to, right? That's what we should. And then we've just got Taylor, who's just like, well, I was like, well, I can leave, and maybe there'll be something better than what was here. I've never made a connection with anyone here, so I'm just going to go somewhere else. Fuck it. Doesn't matter. And so, like, out of those three guys, like, really, poor Donovan, like, Landon could have died any day. But Taylor, but Taylor's, like, the least likely of the three of them to be the person that you're rooting for, and yet he is the person you're rooting for, even though he, at first, is callous and all of those other things. And it makes for an interesting dynamic.
It's like a dark version of Kirk, Spock, Bones in that it's almost this cynical... The whole movie is kind of a tonal opposite of Star Trek, in which Star Trek is very hopeful. And Taylor, our hero, as you say, is the epitome of nihilism and cynicism. And he wants, and he's, I mean, it is a fascinating thing too, coming from somebody like Charlton Heston, Captain fucking America over here. And all he in this movie can play, this character he's playing in this movie is this guy who can't stand humanity.
He hates it.
It's kind of remarkable that happened, although I suppose he was younger at the time. I wanted to mention on the Dodge thing, I think there's a quote in there where they say Dodge would walk headlong into a volcano if he thought that there was a soil sample to obtain or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lots of things about him being the first to do it is real. Like he has this insatiable curiosity and desire to acquire knowledge for the sake of doing something new, which I think is really cool. And not for nothing, that's the African-American person in the cast. Like, I think is really is a really nice element as well. Like Landon comes off as like if this was a Pulp Fiction story from like the 30s, where you just have your Buck Rogers type or your Flash Gordon type, who's just like again like all American, like saves the day and go home or goes home and everything's fine. He like with no scars on him, and never really like thinks about what he wants out of life or thinks about anything. He just wants to be the hero.
Yeah.
And that's why he's terrible at it. And then we get these like ironic results for both of them because like Landon never really thinks, like he just kind of goes with it because he expects to be the hero in this whole scenario. And he survives, but he's the one who loses the ability to think. Like he is lobotomized. Dodge is the one who is most focused on the scientific aspects of everything, and ultimately he becomes a museum piece, a monument to the ape science, like celebrating everything. And then Taylor, the nihilist, the one who could kind of take being alive, he could take it or leave it, is the one who ultimately survives the most and is forced to reckon with all the sins of humanity's past, even though he's the one who's already like, I've already like written off humanity. I don't care about them anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
And he's forced to kind of acknowledge that he does care that humanity has destroyed itself.
But he doesn't. It's an interesting thing. When Zaius gives him that final speech before he rides off to the statue about how humanity is terrible, Taylor, who always has a retort for everyone, does not have a retort for it. Man is a scourge. Man is terrible, isn't that? And he doesn't say a damn word because I think he agrees.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have these wonderful... We have this wonderful time with these actors who, we lose pretty quickly into the movie, relatively speaking. So much so that like I often think back on the movie and like don't even really think too much about the march through the wilderness with them all, which I think is just being too familiar with the franchise too soon in some regards. Like sometimes you need to take a step back and be like, okay, wait, let's watch this with fresh eyes, because then you get into the actual like when you're watching this and you spend all this time with them like wandering through this arid desert, and it's really arid in the real world too. Like it's a terrible time for them all on this whole filming. And then you get to this like the green space, and you start with like the scarecrows, and that's like this wonderful like, oh no, there's definitely intelligent life here, and they're also trying to be in some way menacing, regardless of like how like what they're trying to be menacing towards or anything like that. Like the first sign of civilization of any kind is a warning, and then we go in and we get many people's favorite scene in the movie where we get a bunch of naked dudes hopping into the water.
Yeah,
and it's,
a couple of butts.
Some sexy time.
Got 3 separate butts.
Yeah.
You know what I was thinking? The only thing is like, I was just like, these are very trusting scientists because they just jumped into that water. Like they didn't even like for all that they know, like we know because it's been around for so long, and like, I came into it knowing the twist because it had been out for so long, right? When I was a kid and I watched it. But, like, for all they know, they're on another planet and they don't even do, like, a test. Like, they don't even, like, stick a stick in it to see if it dissolves or, like, anything. Like, they never question the fact that it's just water. And, like, listen, I get it. They've been walking through a desert. They were really dirty and stuff like that. But they were scientists, and they should have checked that.
They should have. I honestly, looking back on this movie, I'm impressed that they even took the time to be like, oh, wait, we should check if the atmosphere is breathable before we try to leave. Well,
before they leave, yeah.
That part's good. I guess you could argue that because they had to deal with the ship sinking, they're at least familiar with that the water that they had encountered was just salt water up until this point, and this is arguably probably fresh water because there's like a lot of vegetation around it. But even in a scenario where it is perfectly clean water at this lake they're jumping into, you don't know what's in the lake.
Listen, there are lakes in our current timeline that you probably don't want to swim in.
Yeah.
So just putting that out there in general. I get it. It made for a fun scene where lots of butts went flying into water, and there was some splishy splashing, and there was some clothes stealing, which, I mean, everyone knows that hijinks are hilarious and fun. So they must have added layers of humor and lightheartedness to what is actually essentially a pretty nihilistic and dark script. But also, I'm just saying that, like,
yeah, that's true. I mean,
the whole pond is kind of, or waterfall or whatever, is kind of the embodiment of the false sense of security that it represents. It's almost like they give you a break before everything goes horribly wrong again. So you have this really decompressed, almost Lostian in scope, sort of dwelling on the dry nature of the desert. And so they really just need to pop that bubble real quick before they throw you into the next horrible thing, I guess.
Because there's like a moment of them being almost optimistic following this, like when the fact that they find a thing that's like humans but they're dumb, and like Taylor's like, if this is the best this planet has, we'll be running the show. This place.
And they're sitting around eating coconut like it's no biggie. Like they're just straight chilling.
Just having a great time. Just jump in the water, swim, relax. They're very optimistic about a lot.
And I think this is around the time, or maybe it's earlier, where I mentioned the Bechdel test earlier. There is a fourth astronaut, of course, Stewart, who sadly does not make it. And she becomes Mummy Lady because the seal or something was broken and her cryogenic tube. But
classic Twilight Zone, by the way. Like, there are multiple Twilight Zones where characters are in pods of some kind, and are, like, when they all wake up, they're dead, or like someone's dead.
which is good. I mean, and I think actually that happens in the con in Space Seed, if I'm recalling correctly. I think that literally happens in Space Seed, where some of the pods were broken and there's corpses in there. Anyway. But I think it's when they're chewing on that coconut and Taylor's eyeing up Nova. And I think he says something that Stewart was their most precious cargo.
Oh my God, this was so bad. Yes.
They treat this lady like a commodity or like a sack of rice or something. It's just bonkers.
He actually says something about her. Of course, they would have to put their passionate input or something like that. Because I paused it, rewound it, looked at the subtitles, like as I played it again, and then I rewound it again. And my boyfriend was like, wow, that was said. I was like, yeah, that wouldn't make it into like a straight remake of this film now.
I mean, I guess
it'd be really bad.
I guess it makes sense for Taylor the character. But it's also like, it doesn't really pass smell tests on any level, really.
But
well, and later he brings it up when he's like is like talking about her to Nova, like when he's just like kind of thinking about the character, and it's like, oh yeah, like what? Like, I guess if you're like launching a probe with a manned probe to an unknown planet, it makes sense to have like breeding pairs theoretically, but like also they didn't. Like, but what was the plan?
Yeah, it made it sound like she would just breed with all of them.
It would make more sense if it was the reverse of in the gender ratio on that one, honestly.
Yeah, but I don't. Like. It made it sound like, just in case one of them fail, one of them should be able to succeed. I don't know, Case. It was a bad line.
I mean, it makes sense to have a
No, you are right.
Why is it 4 people? And why is it a ratio of 3 to 1? Like, why are any of those choices being made?
No, you are completely right. This is definitely a flaw.
Mm-hmm. And the honest answer is, don't worry about it. That's not what we're trying to.
She's dead anyway. It's fine.
Yeah.
And Landon shouldn't be sad about it. Her or his family.
She's been dead for 50 years at this point.
Yeah. I think they say that, yeah.
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 And then we get this like incredibly dramatic moment, which is the horn and all the humans running, and like the camera work is so great there, like where like all of a sudden you dip down into the level of the corn levels so that like you can't see things very well. This is where the music really kicks into overdrive, and like they get the message pretty quick. It's like, whatever the fuck that was, we're joining them.
I love the big sticks. Reminded me, it may have been something Spielberg borrowed for the Raptors, actually, in Lost World, but like later on,
with the tails,
with the sticks popping up and whacking it because you don't know what they are right away and stuff, and it's something that is on its face not threatening, but in the context of the music and the flow of the scene, you're like, oh, something's coming, something bad.
Yeah. I think also, like, you see the humans kind of, like, start to, like, back up slowly, and then the music starts building, and you see those sticks, and it's just like, wait. And in my head, it was just like, you see people moving, you should be moving with the people. Like total animal instinct for me. I was like, run!
Yeah. Right. Yeah, they convey it so well, and then we get the wonderful reveal of apes on horseback, like this huge part of the franchise that's like crystallized so well, because you see one kind of rush by and you can't quite see its face, and then another one comes through and like turns, and it's like, oh yeah, no, that's a gorilla face right there. Like, and this this is the first test of the makeup, and it does a really good job of being like, yep, that's, oh, I see why this is called the Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, I forget the name of the guy who designed the makeup, but I think that he is probably like a decent chunk responsible for the success of this movie, because if those prosthetics didn't work, like you say, it wouldn't work at all. And they really sell it, man. I don't know, even now, jaded with CGI and all this stuff, I look at those ape prosthetics and go, those are damn good. They're really convincing. Like, you see those backstage shots of them like smoking cigarettes and stuff, and it just weirdly looks like apes sitting around smoking cigarettes. Really strange. But no, it works really well. I would also love to point out the irony of an allegory about animal rights, with them like fucking around with horses so much in this, like especially the second movie where they're knocking them over and just, sort of tripping them and all that stuff. I'm just
we called attention to that one in the Beneath episode. It was like, oh no, I'm not a big fan of the amount of horse stunts that are going on here.
Yeah, I want to go back, because I want to. It's John Chambers is the gentleman who did the makeup, and he actually, before there was actually a real like award, he actually got like an honorary award for makeup, because like I think it was like 1986 when they actually made that a real category. So he was one of the few, I think there was only one other guy before him that actually won Academy Award for the makeup that he did in this movie. And he actually learned some of the techniques for crafting it from crafting bandages in World War II.
Yes. Yeah.
And prosthetics.
Yeah.
Like making fake limbs.
And like, so helping people to like look more normal and be able to like fit back into society. So like, it is kind of like pretty amazing. Like the makeup that was done on this, and the test is the reason why, like his makeup is the reason why this movie got made. Because the studio was like, actually, that looks pretty good. All right, let's see it.
That's right.
Yeah.
He also did Mr. Spock's ears, and so he had that going for him. A really talented dude. That test is bizarre because, if you squint, they don't even really look like monkeys, kind of. But I could see how you would look at that and go, oh, there's potential here.
Yeah. I think the best part about the makeup is that there's enough room around the eyes so that you really see how the actors emote. It gives a chance for all of these actors to give performances. I mean, like, one of my favorite scenes is the courtroom scene, because every single one of the orangutans have different expressions as things are being said to them. And they're just so good. Like, oh no, why? Right. It's amazing. I love it.
It is. I love that too. When you watch the documentaries and stuff, Kim Hunter, when she's talking, I still see her exaggerate her lips, and her, because that's how they get the emotions out of the monkey makeup, is by hyper exaggerating what they're doing with their faces and stuff. And so I couldn't help but wonder, I hope that didn't develop into a tick for Miss Hunter for the rest of her life.
or at least like she didn't have to ice her face at the end of every night, right, from overuse.
Well, I mean, she competes for most appearances in a Planet of the Apes movie. The only Roddy McDowall ultimately beats her, and then
the producer's wife.
Natalie Trundy. She's not in this one, but she's in all the other of the original. Yeah.
She plays a mutant in 2. She's
a scientist in 3 in Escape, and then she's Caesar's mate in 4 and 5.
Yeah.
And she's the person who kept the lawgiver statue.
Oh,
she had that until she auctioned it off, like in the early 90s for some charitable cause thing.
I was a couple drinks in looking for a statue of that lawgiver statue that I could purchase last night from the eBay, and let me tell you, those are too expensive for my blood. You get it dropped like $3,000. The one that was affordable was the bleeding one from 2. Is like, I don't want a lawgiver statue covered in blood. What kind of nerd do you take me for? What am I going to look at that all day? Jeez.
Yeah. So before we move on from this first encounter with the apes, like I think one of the things that's really cool, in addition to like we get to see how the 3 astronauts are smarter than the other humans. Like their intelligence is allowing them to avoid traps that everyone else is getting caught by, which I think is really cool. And we get the element of like the one who comes out unscathed is the one who has actually ultimately maimed the worst with Landon. But I really like after Taylor gets shot in the neck, which is, you know, a cool dramatic thing that's like, this is how he fucking survives, like by staying quiet effectively. But we get some time with the gorillas before we go back to Ape City, and it's like kind of nice to have a few moments here where like this part right here would have been a sufficient satire of human culture just by itself. Like it's so similar to like a Calvin and Hobbes strip where like deer start hunting humans in offices, like where it's like all the apes, we get them speaking English, so we establish that part there. We get the camera stuff. We get like the fact that this hunt is a thing that they're participating in as like a sport, even if it's like protecting crops or whatever the impetus for it is. But I think it's like, here's a microcosm of all the things that we're going to talk about with the apes. Right here, humans are being put up in cages and apes are the ones like celebrating it, and like they treat them like as pests. And I think that's such a cool moment right there with the gorillas themselves, and we see how they like take joy in this all.
Yeah, Bungalow Bill. It's disgusting, but it's really striking imagery to see them hanging upside down, you know, and then the photos being taken. These really mundane, and that's where the Twilight Zone-y stuff comes in. The really mundane human things or scenes you would normally associate with humans being turned on their head like that. It's really striking.
Yeah, but then the movie continues on, and we get introduced to finally Kim Hunter as Zira, and we get to see a bit more of what ape society is like with the whole like chimpanzee doctors that are looked down upon by the orangutans, and like all like the racial metaphors that they start introducing here, and it's so good. Like all of it's just so good.
Yeah, I love that the actors who played the different types of apes tended to eat lunch together, as that was observed in one of these documentary things I was watching, where that's an interesting little sociological.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it speaks to this unconscious pack mentality that humans have just in general, and like it's going off of what we see in the movie. As soon as the people start running, the astronauts start running, like you get everyone dressed up in makeup, and probably there's some very simple reasons that are like the start, like not just that they're all gorillas or all orangutans, they probably had their makeup being done at the same time. Right. So there's probably a starting point there. Their scenes are going to be like together, like all of those things are going to be going on. So, you know, like there's probably innocuous specific reasons, but then it becomes, when you take a step back, you're like, oh, I see how these like striations in society develop without even necessarily it being a malicious choice.
And that's the beauty of science fiction, to look at these things through a detached lens, so you can slip the medicine in with the mashed potatoes. Whereas, like, you couldn't do a movie like this necessarily straight up and have it be a, blockbuster or something like that. I mean, sometimes it's hard to say these things. It's easier to say it when there's monkeys involved, or aliens in the case of Star Trek, or whatever. I mean, it's just handy that humans have that capability.
Yeah, and then we get to see like the different relationships between them, like the relationship Julius, the gorilla, like human wrangler that is there, and his relationship with Dr. Zira, like they're very like nice to each other. Like he looks up to her, like it has a really good relationship. But then he's also the one who's just going to just like take a baseball bat and just start smacking around humans, or he's the one like holding the fire hose. And that's such an evocative shot when he's like blasting them later. And like that's later in the movie, but like we see how later in the trial scene, there's the really important line of, it seems some apes are more equal than others.
Yeah.
and that's like that I think is the thesis of this movie, where it like people, even if they try to present an egalitarian world where everyone has upward mobility, like there are still all these things that are binding us down, and it's things that we're putting on ourselves. You know, this is in the wake of the Watts riots. This isn't like we are seeing that American exceptionalism may not be real. Like it might just be a story that we're telling ourselves. And I like that we are showing we've got characters who are at the different echelons of their society, and how that doesn't mean like a person who is a bad guy to the human isn't necessarily a bad guy to the other apes. But their ways of existing are through this like much more rigid class structure that's being put on them. But it is supposed to reflect like the harder to define class structure that exists in the U.S.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, it's. I think also going back to like just Julius and Zira's relationship too. You have that just happen on a regular, everyday, right? You know, a guy, he says a couple things, but he's a good guy. Until he does something that's like, oh no, all those jokes, they weren't jokes. So I think you see that a lot, and you know, he's part of that enforcer group, right? The gorillas are the enforcer group. So he's going to enforce things on humans, and he's going to do his job in those ways. And he's not going to be someone who's going to agree with Zira, no matter how, you know, friendly he is with her as the doctor overseeing certain things, because that's just not her place, you know? He's an enforcer, and Zaius is the law.
That's really interesting. I never really think about Julius as a important character, but you're right. Like, he exemplifies that, you know, that even the most normal seeming people in the context of a society are capable of these horrible things. I had misheard that we mentioned that later in the movie, where he's really, you know, that shut up, you freak, shut up. And I had always misheard that line. I never knew what he was saying, but Taylor knows his name is Julius because he name checks him. He goes, Julius, you, and then fires him again. Which, as a kid, I am not embarrassed, but bemused to admit that I misheard what Charlton Heston says there, the Madhouse line. I thought he was screaming, "It's a man hose."
Which honestly would make sense.
As in a hose to hose down men.
I mean, it could be. It's the Planet of the Apes, and they're using that hose to hose down men.
Yeah.
Like, talking about the hose scene, one thing that stood out. So one of the sources that we were looking at for this is SF Debris did a video about both the background for the movie, The Planet of the Apes, and then also the a deeper analysis of the movie as a whole. And a point that he raised that I thought is really cool, and I hadn't really put two and two together, but in the context of the 60s, like, seeing that he had at his disposal this powerful hose to knock people up against a wall is very evocative of television coverage of riots, and specifically of the police state that exists but doesn't normally get discussed in the real world of the United States. And a lot of the conversation might be American-centric, but that's because this is, while the novel is French, everyone making this movie is American, and it was ultimately shot in America, and the intended audience is American. And so making a connection of like, oh, well, they readily have these hoses, which would be suppression tools that they probably turn on each other. Like, ape does not kill ape is a thing in this whole franchise, but that doesn't mean that gorillas aren't being used to beat down chimpanzees every now and then, or other gorillas, at the behest of the orangutans. Yeah,
we see it in the second movie where they do that, where the gorillas do that to the protesting chimps.
Yeah, so it's not just a society that treats their animals poorly, it's a society that, like, violently oppresses each other, and that the only form of upward mobility for gorillas is to be the source of that violence.
It's deeper than I've ever thought about it, frankly, but okay.
Yeah, like every time I look at these movies, I keep feeling sad for the gorilla group, because despite the fact that we end up with with villainous military characters, the fact that they're even in that position, and part of this is like just the real world understanding that I don't know was necessarily like common knowledge when this movie was made, but that is common knowledge now, that gorillas tend to be the more docile of the great apes. Like the fact that their role that they have been cast into just by virtue of their physical ability to be the enforcers of violence, or like through violence by virtue of size, is a really tragic thing that is being put upon them.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think we touched on this a little bit, too, when we talked about Battle, which is actually the first of our long series that we talked about. But in that, right, there's a moment where Aldo is, he's in school and he's completely belittled and like made to look bad. And I was like, not only is that bad teaching, but like, it's just a messed up moment. Like this is a messed up moment overall. So I think overall, I can see why after watching 5 of these movies, Case, albeit in reverse, you feel a true like sympathy for the gorillas overall, because they're constantly placed in that position where this is their only option.
It's interesting, though. It's like the American military, too. A lot of poor people don't really have a lot of choice for options for higher education and things like that, but for going into the military and serving. So it's interesting you bring up the gorillas not having a choice in the matter, or being forced into this or something like that, because there's probably some similarity to American military forces anyway.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. People, there's always active recruitment at schools of people who are not upwardly mobile. Like any high school with a group of people that don't have lots of money, you'll find a recruitment towards the end of the year to be like, hey, this is how you can go to college. And again, for gorillas in this film, like how they can move upwardly or have any kind of power or say in the society is by being the enforcers for the faith that the orangutans hold over everyone as the law.
Yeah, and I mean, like, the point of doing a movie like this is to put in stark relief the things that are subtle and maybe overlooked in our society. Like, that's why, like, the movie benefits from a degree of camp. Like, the way that the society breaks down, I mean, outside of, like, already the conceit of, like, well, could apes ever be in an intellectual position to be in the society? What are the logistics of how this works when they are different species? So, like, would it all, like, would it just be, like for one thing, they're not going to be interbreeding because they're like fully different species. That just can't happen. So like they're like, are these 3 distinct population groups overlapping each other without any kind of conflict? It doesn't matter because that's not the point. Like the original was supposed to have like a 4th class of like an undesirable class of baboons, and like it didn't work with makeup, so they cut that completely. But that's even like taking that step even further, like of having not just a different species, like but a different type of animal altogether. Because while baboons are primates, they are not apes. Like, so you would have this like separate group in that regard. We don't care about the logistics. Like, we never see a female orangutan or gorilla in, at least as a main character. Like there might have been one in like the funeral scene, but for the most part, we're looking at like male characters for all this, because again, this movie fails the Bechdel test horrifically. But we don't really care that much about the intricacies of like how the society would actually function. Like, we never see like how they deal with like some of the crafts that they do, like the guns and everything like that. It's just a process of, well, we want to show a stark relief of human society in against this contrast. Having a society that is done as such a campy, over the top striation that doesn't work intellectually. Like, when you get into it, it does not break down into a way that would logically play out. And the Matt Reeves movies have done a wonderful job of establishing some of that. But there is a reason why, when you're looking at Dawn, it's almost exclusively chimpanzees in that movie. Like, there are a couple gorillas, but like we barely spend any time with them. And like, there's only Maurice as far as orangutans go. Who again,
named after Maurice Evans, who played Dr. Zayas. Yeah.
Yep. And then the gorilla in the first movie is named Buck after Buck Cartelian, who plays Julius.
Awesome.
There's a lot of love for those for that. But those movies, like when they try to have a protagonist and a focus on the society, have to kind of shift into like, okay, well, it's mostly one type of person, like because it's having such a disparate group of species in a society just doesn't work, and that's why the movie can't be that realistic. The point isn't to be like, well, here's how a logical ape society would function. No, the point is, here is how we as humanity is terrible, and let's reflect that by way of these animal figures. That them all being apes works for this like general theme, but could have honestly been like all kinds of species if they really wanted it to be. Like it could be a Zootopia type situation,
right?
If they cared. But the point is they don't. Like the point is, let's look at all the terrible things about humanity from the lens of like a thing that's just copying us at best. So I find it really cool, like what this movie does with it all. Like the fact that we get this visualization of like how they suppress dissident thought by way of both violence and also like cultural shunning of each other. You know, like the chimpanzees.
And theology.
Yeah, and theology. Like the chimpanzees are really scared to share anything.
Yeah, Cornelius says that at one point when Zira is pressing him about his discoveries he made in the Forbidden Zone, he's like, they're not a big deal anyway. And besides, I don't want to get my head chopped off. And I was like, oh, shit. You know, I mean, that's the level we're at in this ape society, is like something even innocuous by Cornelius's standards. Even if he's downplaying it, he's literally scared for his life.
Yeah.
Yeah. The entire time, too, because there's a few times where, you know, because she is pressing him because she definitely feels like this is like very important science. This is, you know, and he's just like, hey, like, yeah, no, I can't do this. And she's like, but you had a permit. He's like, and then it was revoked, you know, like, and it was taken away. Like I can't talk about these things. And he feels, you know, a lot of fear, even before the trial. He feels he's more hesitant than she is. And when Taylor asks him to read the statement, he is hesitant because he's like, oh my God, this statement's not going to go over well. But he still reads it. And he's just like, I am a spaceman from very far away on another planet, and I flew. And everyone's like, what? And he's just like, it wasn't me. It was the human. Please don't kill me. That's kind of like his reaction. But there is, like, there's this, like, very, like, they're scared to challenge the status quo.
And Roddy sells it so well, too. He just, I don't know. They are lucky that they had actors of that caliber under that makeup to deliver on scenes like that. Because you can see his hesitancy to read the statement, even though he's wearing layers of plastic and prosthetic or whatever. It's remarkable what they were able to do.
All of those actors did such a great job, but like we just cannot state enough that Roddy McDowall and Kim Hunter did gangbusters work on this, like just incredible stuff. I
guess I didn't even realize that she was Stella in Streetcar Named Desire. I was like not even registering any of that. And I think the only other place I know Roddy McDowall from is the Poseidon Adventure. I think he was like a waiter or something in that.
We not too long ago did Bedknobs and Broomsticks, where he shows up as a skeezy reverend who's trying to like sleep with Angela Lansbury to get
awesome,
which is a lot of fun. But yeah, the two of them just do fantastic work. And apparently because the makeup time was so long for them, that Charlton Heston actually never worked with them without makeup, so that when they went to the premiere, Kim Hunter came up to Charlton to like say hi, and he did not recognize her until she was like, "No, I'm Kim. I was Zira." It's like, "Oh my God!"
He whipped out his gun.
Love that.
Get away from me.
Well, like, so Charlton Heston has this. You know what? All right. This movie is great. We've talked a lot about that. Like I want to like hit a couple great points, but we do also need to talk about the things that went into this production. And we've hinted at a lot of those. So I just want to like knock out some of the other things that are like great. The ending, everyone knows, is fucking amazing. Like the Statue of Liberty is so iconic. It is the lack of score when it happens is so cold and like
just
depressing.
The shore coming in and out,
and them keeping the sound of those waves coming in as the credits roll and nothing but that. Just like, and it's consistent for like a good 2-3 minutes after. Like as all the credits roll, all you're hearing. So I could just imagine sitting in the theaters after all of that being like, wait.
yeah, basically.
And then just hearing that. And so it's like just the echo, the realization that all of this time, and that we as a society, as a world, blew ourselves up. Like, this is why there's a forbidden stuff. Like, I was just like, oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the poor Statue of Liberty.
It's what bears repeat viewings. It's what makes it, like, the shock ending is probably what hooked people the first time. But then everything else leading up to it is also strong. So it has those two great elements working for it. It works as one narrative, but it also works as this little world. You can kind of get lost in all the nooks and crannies and stuff. It's funny. My daughter I was trying to watch it the other night. And as you can see, my house is full of small creatures that make lots of little noise for your editor. I apologize. But but my daughter was like, can we watch Cosmic Kids Yoga now? Can we watch Cosmic Kids Yoga now? I was like, well, listen, I'm watching a monkey movie, so you have to wait. So she sat with me for the very end. And then she goes, oh, the Statue of Liberty. And the only reason she recognized it is because she has my old X-Men, the movie Statue of Liberty playset. The one where you can trap Sabretooth in. But she was like, now can we watch Cosmic Kids Yoga? Anyway. Sorry, Case, you were on a whole speech there. Yeah,
I think it's such a wonderful thing because, like, so the way the book played out was that it is a story within a story. Someone is reading a transcription of events that they like, that they're in space and they like come across it, and it tells the story of this astronaut who comes to this planet that has apes that are intelligent, and they realize that, like, oh god, the apes are a civilization that was built on top of a human civilization that preceded it, and he leaves that world depressed to discover that humanity on this world falls and that apes just rise up as again this like pale imitation of human society on this world. And he goes back to his own world where by the time he gets back there, because of all the time dilation, the same thing has happened there where apes have taken over his. And then the people reading the story like put it down. It's like, well, that's silly that a human could ever be intelligent because they're apes piloting a spaceship at that point. Like it's way more over the top and like it's just like here's just raw satire versus like trying to have like a more grounded approach in any way. So this movie finds a really good balance on that one, and the stroke of brilliance that is the Statue of Liberty, and the fact that like Zaius knows about it, like that he is entirely correct that Taylor is not going to like what he finds out there, is the thing that like makes this whole like Rod Serling Twilight Zone episode writ large so perfect, because it's such a picture a world where you travel long enough and then like you've now arrived at a place where apes have remained. That's the Twilight Zone. Like it's right there.
Yeah. I was always unclear whether or not Zaius knew specifically about the statue, but during this rewatch, I was convinced he absolutely knows.
If not that specific statue, there's probably other human shit like that he saw that would have been just as big a tip-off. We know Queensboro Plaza apparently fell and is like not too far.
That's right. It's so funny though. I was watching the doll scene as a kid. I remember it was really like, like a big reveal, a doll that talks, and he throws it. But I was just cracking up because I was thinking about what by that logic, I would love for them to have found any number of anthropomorphic action figures and dolls and shit. My daughter's got a room full of talking giraffes and stuff. And I mean, what is implication and any profound implication for the purposes of the story? It is,
yeah. Of course. No, when the horse people from space come and they're like, well, why do you make art about horses that can talk? Like, right. Yes. I am not your little pony.
Yes. Yeah,
we will have a reckoning about how our horse overlords used to run things.
It is kind of interesting though in that scene with the doll that Nova's the one sort of playing with it because she's got this sort of weird perverse childlike thing going on, which may just be by virtue of her play acting more of an animal and stuff, but it is kind of funny that she's the one that does the thing that a child would normally discover on their own, which is to find the pull string.
Yeah, I mean, like, Nova is supposed to be somewhat curious. Like, we do see that she, at the very least, has, like, an awareness of, like, don't speak. She, like, tries to stop him from speaking at times. She erases the writing. There is an element of the the dumb human being a facade that they put on themselves. So like she's not dumb. She's just not educated in any meaningful way, but she has survived in a world that would destroy her for showing any kind of intellect.
I think they show a little proof of that too, because when Taylor is trying to show Zira that he's smart enough and they're in that larger cage outside, he writes something on the ground, and when she sees that other apes are coming, that like gorillas and Zayas are coming, she bends down and starts like wiping away his words. And everyone, of course, is distracted because Taylor sees it and is a total a-hole and pushes her very violently out of the way. But she's survived. Like she clearly understands that there are certain things that people don't do.
That's a nuance. That's a nuance I hadn't considered. I hadn't thought of it, her protecting him. I had just thought of it as, I don't know, when I'm, watching it, it just seems as though she does it on some sort of an instinctual level. But you're right. Yeah, she's doing it in a purposeful way.
Because she looks up at him and then she sees the others, and the shot actually like shows you like looking, and she gets down and she looks up and she very quickly uses her hands to like wipe away the first word very, very quickly. And so there's this implication, like, Nova may not understand what was written. Like, she doesn't necessarily understand the symbols. She doesn't understand everything. She can't verbalize things, but she kind of knows some things are happening. And I think she does understand that, like, Zira intends her to be Taylor's mate because she follows him around like a puppy. She's like, okay, well, I'm his now. She does these things where like she's actively very attached to him, and it's not because of his sparkling personality, let's be honest. So I think that there is some level of understanding that's kind of like implied in the script. It's just harder because it's never really confirmed by anyone saying it. It's just kind of something like if you're watching it and you're really watching her beats, you can kind of see Nova have this awareness, but her awareness is very fundamental to her being a survivor, like surviving this reality. She's not looking for anything more than that. She's not super curious. She's just kind of like, oh no, we're going to get in trouble. Oh no, we have to hide. Oh no, we're together. Oh look, this is fun. I think the doll moment's the only time that she's actually kind of having fun because she's looking at this thing and she's like, oh, it's so pretty. And she's like, oh, whoa, it makes noise. Like, and so as much as her role is limited, there is stuff that she's doing in the background. So
yeah, and they go out of their way to say, I think Zira has a line that there's no scientific reason why humans should be mute. They have the capability to do it, and so that there's another reinforcement of the survival mechanism of the humans that have remained.
Yeah, like they exist in a society that violently oppresses them for any ape-like behavior as they see it. So why would they present anything like that if it's only going to create more trouble for them? Yeah, I mean, we haven't shouted out enough about Linda Harrison as Nova. Like, young girl, like, dating one of the producers, like, easy to see how she got the part, but at the same time did a really good job of being this companion for a character who, a big thing for Taylor is that he rejects humanity, and then once humanity has been taken away from him, he starts to have cold feet about it. Like, he regrets it. He longs for some kind of companionship, and Nova provides that. And she kind of becomes the protagonist of the next movie. Like, we see her speak in the next movie. We find, there's more going on for the character in that regard. And like you said, like she is curious and she is protective and she has all these elements, even if they're not conventional intellect. And I think that the part could have been worse. It's a like the fact that it's like here's your mute girl on your like jungle planet to like be that we're just going to give you as a mate is like a little icky in some ways. Like,
I mean, I think it is, but it's in the context of it, it's probably icky in a way that serves the thing, because like Zira is so amazed that he has this capability that she wants him to breed, and it's like from like this very scientific thing, like, and when you think about it, like dog breeders do this, right? They see like a really cute feature in a dog and like a similar feature in another dog. And then, eventually we get a pug and we're like, oh no, we've gone too far. And like...
What hath science wrought?
This thing can't breathe. And so like, it's icky, but it's also the kind of icky that you kind of expect from the apes, because this is an anomaly. This is a human that can speak. This is a human that has reason. Up until this point, the apes don't even think that they have reason. I mean, Zira's been doing like brain experiments on humans, like actively like autopsy and pulling them apart and figuring out how they tick and what they do. And like, so like, she sees this creature that for the first time she respects, and she's like, oh, whoa, there's one that's just like us. I need to breed it. So it's icky, but it fits within the overall narrative, and definitely is beautiful, because later on in 3, the next best movie, she's kind of called to task for the experiments that she has done, right? Like that's one of the things that the humans in the past/future, because technically it's the future in the order of the movies, but the past in the movies because they went to the past. Oh boy.
Yeah.
But like that's
how?
one of
doesn't matter. Don't ask.
It doesn't matter. Just come along with me.
Yeah.
Just follow. But like that's one of the things that's kind of levied as to like whether or not these two apes should be, chimpanzees should be allowed to still exist within human society, and whether or not they should be allowed to breed and, have, because she's done monstrous things to humans.
Yeah.
And sticking him with a mate is probably the least of the monstrous things she has done.
Well, and that gets into like the thing from, so the book, the ultimate reason why he has to flee the planet of the apes is because he breeds with Nova, and that baby is distinctly intelligent in a way that human babies had not been at that time. Like they note that even its cries had a cry of longing that had some sort of deeper intelligence than other babies. And that is then reflected in Escape as being much more direct by way of baby Milo being an intelligent ape baby. So like there was always going to be this element, because Nova was always part of the book, and like pushing that character forward was always going to be there. And I think they did a fine job with it, like adapting it here. And the fact that like the apes are way more hostile to Taylor in this movie than they are in the book, I think that it all makes sense. Like the world feels much more cohesive, even if there are a lot of parts that like the logic, the second you think about like, well, why would 3 species live in the same city together? Like, how does that even work? Like, are there, there's different anatomical differences between them, regardless of anything else, like different dietary needs for all of them, regardless of anything else. So like, how would that work? No, it doesn't matter. Cause like the point is we're going to do this like expose of America fucking sucks, guys, in a lot of ways.
I mean, and that's why it helps so much that you can buy into the world, because it buys you a ticket to all of those logic leaps if you're already buying the world. And you buy the world through the pacing of the movie. You buy the world through the skill of the actors. You buy the world through the amazing use of those prosthetics. So, and that's where that camp comes in, we talked about earlier with this and Star Trek and stuff, is like, okay, yeah, it is there, but I can buy it. I'm willing to fork over the money to ignore. It's like you're paying your own brain to ignore certain parts of the thing. Like I was talking about English earlier. Yeah, that really makes it like, why wouldn't Taylor address that? But it doesn't matter. Yeah. We bought the ticket for this movie, and this movie made a lot of money. This movie was a huge success. It had a $5.8 million budget and had a $33 million return, which is small potatoes nowadays, but at the time was fucking incredible. Like this movie should not have worked, and yet somehow it kind of saved the studio after Dr. Dolittle was a giant flop. So also an Arthur P. Jacobs production, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why don't we take a break, and when we come back, let's actually talk about the issues that befell the production of this movie and how it was overcome. And we've talked about a few of them, so we can move through kind of quickly, but it is really interesting just to see how this movie almost didn't happen in the first place, and I am so glad that it did. So we're gonna hear from a wonderful show on our network, and when we come back, we'll get into the nitty gritty.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds,
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun, whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen.
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there, so we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.
And we're back. So I did want to actually look at this from the perspective of the production issues that went into it. It's got a lot of stuff, and we can kind of go through some of them fairly quickly. Like the novel was not thought to be a good choice to be adapted to screen. So Pierre Boulle is better known for The Bridge over the River Kwai, which different kind of animal that we're talking about in terms of like both its pedigree as a book, but then its success as a film. And part of the reason people were very interested in Pierre Boulle works is that he was credited as the screenwriter because the actual writer of The Bridge over the River Kwai screenplay was on the blacklist, so they couldn't use that name. So Boulle got the credit for both the book and the movie. Like, he wrote the book, but in adapting it, he all of a sudden his name became much more like in the circles of Hollywood conversation. So other books of his were like snatched up, and The Planet of the Apes was quickly snatched up because it was like, oh, well, this could be visually interesting. How do we make this work? And so, you know, a lot of people didn't want to have it made, including Pierre Boulle. He did not think it was a particularly good book of his. He thought it was just sort of like a fluffy science fiction piece that he did that like didn't necessarily have the weight of other projects. So there was a lot of people who had no interest in it, but Arthur P. Jacobs, the producer, like bought the rights and was like, "This is gonna be a thing," and kept going to studios trying to push it, and no one wanted to make it because they thought like, "This is gonna look terrible." Are you talking about actual apes in the scenes? Oh no, it's gonna be makeup. Is this going to be expensive? What is it going to go? So we alluded there was a makeup test early on. That was one of the big things to actually get the movie fully greenlit, because they needed to see that they could have emoting actors who looked convincingly enough like the different types of apes. The makeup test is very crude compared to what we ultimately got, but it still did its job ultimately in terms of being like, oh yeah.
And it's funny to point out that test, the civilization is more advanced. Seemingly, there's like computers, or at the very least, light sort of mapping equipment things. And you had mentioned that one of the key differences between the book and the movie is the extreme treatment of Taylor. Yeah, in this scene, like he's just hanging out. He's like wearing clothes, like he's having a calm conversation with Dr. Sayers. It's all very calm. And I would point out too, I think one of the other big factors in the thing getting made was even before the makeup test, because in the makeup test is Charlton Heston. Arthur P. Jacobs rightly understood from his experience in Hollywood that in order to get people excited about a movie, you had to have a star people could get excited about.
Yeah.
He got his start, I believe, with Marilyn Monroe, right? And then that movie ultimately had to be made with somebody else because Marilyn Monroe died before it could go into production. But that is kind of he had been in Hollywood for long enough to kind of know how to manipulate some of the stuffier folks. And so Charlton Heston plus the makeup, that's your green light.
Yeah, and Charlton Heston was a perfect choice because in addition, he wasn't the only person they ever approached about it, but he is ultimately the best choice because while he had a number of successes and was a bankable name, he had also had a number of flops at that point, and so it was a good time for him to come in on a lower budget movie that he was then the champion for. Like, Heston was a big part of why this movie was made. It was his baby that whole time, and I mean that's the reason why he had to come back for 2, because
despite demanding he get killed off.
Right.
Real Nimoy situation. Yeah.
Yeah. So he championed the movie and kept advancing it forward. Now, this is, again, shortly after The Twilight Zone ended, so they got Sterling as the initial screenwriter on it, and so we end up with some, like, apparently Sterling has quoted that he did like 40 or 50 drafts. It probably includes a lot of like minor revisions because he only had like X number of like handed in like full draft changes. But either way, like they radically reconstructed the world from this much more elaborate scientific kind of future that like was in some ways more advanced and in some ways less advanced than 20th century America, and shifted it to this like more primitive society. But Serling's big thing, the big thing to build towards, was the Statue of Liberty part, and that apparently came from inspiration that Jacobs had while at a deli where they just like saw a Statue of Liberty painting and being like, that's the iconic kind of thing we need.
Yeah,
and who knows, because like then some who takes credit for it, like they probably all have stories for how they came up with it. Everyone has their story for, I saw a fly climbing up the window and that's how I came up with Spider-Man.
Yeah.
But then we get into the issues with the actual makeup, because the makeup ended up being extremely elaborate. It originally took 6 hours to apply to anyone, which meant that they needed to hire like an army of people to put on all the ape prosthetics. So much so that it set back other Hollywood productions, because they had so many makeup artists on hand for this shoot that other shoots couldn't get enough makeup people to do their shoots.
I love that. Yeah.
And by the end, they got it down to like 3 hours.
Yeah, that was going to say. Yeah, they halved it. That's pretty good.
Yeah, and apparently another reason they were able to reduce that time is they started specifically casting for specific ethnicities to make it easier to do the makeup for them. Specifically, Asian people they found had less pronounced nasal features that would get in the way of the prosthetics. So if you just cast that way, it worked better, which is everyone was kind of uncomfortable about. In the production, they were uncomfortable about casting black actors to play gorillas because they thought that would come off as racist. But then they got accused of racism for not hiring enough black actors. And so there was like this whole like back and forth on this one in terms of like, wait, hey, hang on, what are we allowed to say here?
Yeah. Well, good old fashioned 60s Hollywood eugenics. I mean, they were living their best lives at that time. What can I say?
I mean, it is a movie about racism, and it is a movie that, like, at least the producers were aware of the perception of racism, and the fact that they overcorrected is, I guess, better than not correcting at all.
Well, yeah, it was funny because I was in that documentary. They go through all the films, and I had forgotten that the guy that puts Caesar on the slave auction block is a black dude, and I was like, wow, that does not look great.
Yeah.
But they do address it in there. I think that the head bad guy says something like, I came from slave blood or something like that. So at the very least, they're cognizant of it, even if it's a little clunky.
Definitely. Like it's cruder than we get to when we get to like the Matt Reeves movies, but it's or at least less subtle. Like, you know, the big movie of LA is burning and we have a chimpanzee cackling in the night is not a subtle movie, but it is aware of what it's trying to say. And I do appreciate this franchise for all of that. But then we get into the actual shoot itself in terms of like the issues that they had to deal with it all. They fucking decided to film this thing. Initially, they were going to shoot it in England. That all kind of fell through, and they decided to film in Southern California near where the actual studios were. But they decided to fucking film it in the beginning of summer.
Yeah.
And we've noted
Poor
that like
people.
when you get to the later ones, there are times where people are awkwardly wearing like extra layers. Like in battle, everyone has a turtleneck under whatever they're wearing, and it's very obvious the whole time. This movie is the exact opposite problem, and that's because even when they didn't have people in full ape prosthetics, there were people passing out on set. Like the 3 astronauts for their hike through the water or through the desert, like were constantly having heat stroke issues. And then when you start getting the actors on set in that scenario, where with full ape prosthetics, like it got even worse, including one time where they left the straws at base camp. And so Charlton Heston, in order to prevent all of his fellow actors from dehydrating, walked a mile through the desert to get the straws and bring them back, because when they were in their makeup, they couldn't eat or drink without using a straw.
Which was to make the to preserve the prosthetics.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's still insane that anyone forgot the straws. Those poor people in those costumes.
I mean, there's a reason all those actors, after a certain point, were like, no, I'm good. I don't need to come back for the next one. Like Kim Hunter was okay with being done after number 3. You know, it's not as bad. So we talked a while ago about The Wizard of Oz and how that had a lot of issues with the makeup for the actors that included like almost death for a variety of reasons, such as mercury poisoning or also just aluminum poisoning from an inhalation. each of them had their own like cavalcade of horrors as far as being applied. At least it comes off as everyone was on the same team. It just was a long, burdensome process. Like Roddy McDowall apparently would take a nap every time they would put their makeup on him because it was plenty of time for that. Kim Hunter couldn't do that, so she would take Valium before so that she could just completely zone out while that was going on. It was a big process, but again, they sped it up. By the end, they'd halved it, which is substantially better because, like, God, can you imagine sitting in a chair for 6 hours while they just like fuck with you and then go to work?
That's insane. But I remember a story, like I was on a talk show. This is not about Planet of the Apes, but it is about makeup. And Jim Carrey was talking about having to put on the Grinch makeup and how when he first started, it took 8 hours in makeup to get it on. And after like the first or second makeup test, he was like done, and he actually went into his trailer and like kicked something and like called like the producer and was just like, that's it, I'm not going to do this movie, I can't do it, like I'm going crazy in that chair. So they hired someone from the CIA, a former CIA member who deals with people that are being tortured, to teach them how to get through torture. So that he could basically have little tics and things he could do during the 8 hours that were required for makeup. That was their solution.
Boy, no wonder he lost it at a certain point, I guess.
Like,
wow.
So maybe you should have just tried a Valium like him.
Yeah, there's all these pictures behind the scenes of all the apes with like cigarette holders because that was the only way that they would be allowed to smoke. And so like that just became like kind of iconic for all these shots of like, yep, have these like tiny little like extensions that we can put in your mouth because you just can't put anything of any real volume to it. Like you can't take a bite of food. You have to drink like some kind of like smoothie through a straw. Like that's the only way you're going to have any kind of sustenance right now. If you're going to drink some liquid, it's going to be through a straw. If you're going to smoke something, it's going to be effectively through a straw. Like that is going to be your existence for the rest of the day. Every day of shooting.
Woof.
Still, it looks great.
Yep.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
When the choice was made to move the filming from England to California, initially they were going to try to save money because it was going to cost more money to film in California than England because they were going to get tax credits for England. They tried to slash the shooting time from 55 days to 45 days, and that was a whole fight, mostly based around like them being like, no, this is literally the amount of time it takes to get the makeup on these actors. Like we cannot possibly do the shoot faster, and that like that was pushback that was eventually won. But can you imagine if it hadn't?
Yeah.
I mean, they would have had to make some substantial cuts or expand some of the other sequences or something. I don't know what they would have done.
I mean, the easy cuts would be to shorten that opening, but like that, the opening time you just like you need with those actors to like really like get into who they are before you deal with the Planet of the Apes. But like one thing that they never were able to like make work was the actual landing of their spaceship. So they ultimately built the nose cone for it, but they never figured out a model that they could use to show. And so at the very end of filming, it was like, fuck, we have nothing. And they figured out like, all right, well, what if we just like use like helicopter footage and like simulate the crash by way of it being first person. Like that was not an artistic choice. That was them coming up with the best case solution for a thing that they just didn't have in the can. And they didn't have a model for or anything like that. So like, lots of creativity going on to make those parts work. Censors didn't love this movie when it actually like was finally cut together. They did not care for the fact that Charlton Heston was naked in what was supposed to be a G-rated movie. They did not care for the fact that he constantly was saying "damn it all to hell," particularly at the end of the movie. But also the "take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty apes." Like these were all objections that that the censors had to it, and they actually had to like push it through, being like, "No, the scene is necessary of him naked to show how degrading it is, and that he's being treated like an animal." And the "damn you all to hell," they had to actually like convince the censors, no, what he's doing here is he's not swearing, he's literally cursing, he's like invoking God's wrath upon humanity, and like that's how they like got things through, which is funny to think. It's like, oh man, on the one hand, like society was way less prudish than we sometimes give it credit for, but then there are moments where it was like really prudish, like
yeah, like, and it's really funny that is like a huge distinction, right? Like, oh, he cursed. No, he's actually honestly damning us all to hell. So that's better. Oh, okay, I see how that works. Okay, all right, it's biblical. All right, cool.
The rating system is such a joke. It's
stamped and approved.
Such a joke. Oh God. What speaking of him screaming though, it was interesting to find out that Charlton Heston had the flu, or he was very ill during the chase, and that's why he sounds so raspy when he does the take your sting, that thing.
Yeah. I thought it was really funny that the producers actually, like where everyone who was on set was like, no, I think it adds something to it. We should still shoot. And I was like, that's fucked up.
It really was.
It's like, no, actually, you have a gravitas when you feel like crap. So let's just do all of these scenes. They even shot him, that hose scene. He had the flu.
The man hose?
Yeah.
Yeah, with the man hose. Specifically made for men. And I get it, because you see a man there and you got to use that hose.
Got to.
Just got to use your man hose on that man.
Listen, when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. But he would not pass current COVID protocols, probably.
No, God.
But
no. Definitely not. No. None of this. I mean, I don't even know if, the union as it stands today would be okay with how the star of the movie was treated.
Yeah, I mean, certainly him running around spreading disease to all the other people. You wonder, because everyone talks about that part of the, it made his voice sound so perfect for, someone who just got over, a throat injury, and, it works so well for the scene. But, I don't know if anyone's talking about, and 55 extras also all got the flu that day. And maybe they didn't. Maybe he actually was keeping his distance for the most part, aside from when they were shooting, and they're all
no,
literally
there's
wearing
no way,
masks.
Case. You saw him screaming. There's no way. When he was doing his scenes, that spittle was flying everywhere.
Yeah,
that flu got on anyone near him in those scenes. Maybe the makeup saved them a little bit, but I doubt it.
Certainly not. But it's just funny how they don't really talk about it. Again, to bring up Wizard of Oz again, there are so many horror stories from behind the scenes and how the actors were treated and how they almost died and how the Scarecrow had marks on his skin from the Scarecrow mask for months after the production, and how the original Tin Man almost died from aluminum inhalation, and how there were third-degree burns on the Wicked Witch of the West, all across the board, just terrible stuff. And you hear about similar moments in this movie, but at no point is anyone down on this movie. Charlton Heston championed this movie and continued to speak highly of it for years. Kim Hunter continued to speak highly of it for years. They even if they were done being I don't know if I can do another shoot where I'm getting this makeup on me. No one was that angry about it. Generally the vibe coming off of it was yeah, that was hell, but damn it, we made a great movie, and everyone was in it together.
Yeah, there's probably something in there about success and passion and perseverance and believing in it, which is kind of, I give a lot of credit to Arthur P. Jacobs. I mean, that's not something terribly controversial to say, but whatever he did to instill this passion for this project in everyone along the way, from their stars to the people suffering, and through the makeup, through, making experienced, famous Hollywood writer and personality Rod Serling write 30, 40 drafts of a script. For whatever reason, this guy was able to convince everyone to do it. And that's, probably no small part of its success.
Yeah. And this movie then had such a legacy coming off of it, in addition to the fact that, again, it had 8 sequels and 2 TV shows and all of that.
God willing, there'll be more.
Yeah. Yeah, and we constantly are hearing news about, there will be another thing that's going to be after the time of Caesar, yada, yada, yada. All very cool. But, also, this movie was a highly successful sci-fi property that made the big leaps during, the quote-unquote Bronze Age of Hollywood, actually possible. There is a direct line from this movie to Star Wars getting made in the first place. And I think that ties this franchise back around so well to what this show started as a spin-off of a Star Wars podcast that I love it so much to even bring up. This is this is our 150th episode, and being able to look back at what was a truly Herculean task to get this movie on screen, but it created such a work of art, is so cool. And to see how it still ties into nerd culture in such big ways beyond just its literal aspect, but it is the seed that was planted for other big properties to continue growing and actually make money. And there's a direct line then you can make from here to Star Wars, and Star Wars into everything else. Yeah, to ultimately getting to things like the MCU or anything like that. Like you can see how nerd culture, while looked down on, like people didn't want to make this movie because they thought it looked like a serial. They thought that it looked like it was going to be just like some kind of schlock, and instead it became, infamous in pop culture. And you can see how more and more people are like accepting of like the weirder sci-fi stuff and the weirder kind of the fantasy of nerddom. And I'm just really glad that we got to talk about it in such great detail.
Yes, it's such a fun movie, and I'm glad it has stood the test of time, barring one or two lines. And
yeah, I don't think I'll ever get bored of this franchise or this movie. It's a double-edged sword case, like you're saying, because nerdy culture. Like, boy, Flash Gordon really did a number on the whole genre, didn't it? Like for years, everyone thought, oh, well, it's just going to be stupid, little serials or cardboard stuff. It's like, well, relax. Like they didn't have the materials to make these really nice effects. But once they did, there's an element of being able to take it seriously, which is a double-edged sword, because to take it seriously is like what I was talking about at the beginning of my love for this franchise to begin with, is this idea of it's smart enough in places where you can glean something from it, and you can take it seriously if you like. But it is important, I think, to maintain the perspective that these are people running around in monkey costumes, and it's the people that lose that perspective where you get to like incel culture and stuff. So there's like divergence in the woods at some point where people start to take it way too seriously. And you have to remember, this is a movie about a space laser and a big screaming dog that they allow to carry a gun. At the end of the day, Star Wars, you can take Star Wars seriously, but you also have to remember it's kind of silly fun too. So it's important to have that perspective, and healthy, I would argue. But the current movies are a good example of how they can play with that too. They take it, I guess, a little bit more seriously, even though there's more of a horror bent to the current ones. But yeah, I love it. I'll never not love Planet of the Apes. Thank you for inviting me to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I was so glad to connect about this specifically, because like we've shared nerd interests of all kinds before, but it's so.
By the way, why hasn't Boom done a young Taylor like prequel comic to show how he got to be such a prick? Yeah. Like, why hasn't that happened yet? Like, we should probably see that.
It should, honestly, because I feel like there's definitely a story there. I mean, like an intelligent astronaut scientist who like was a ladies' man, clearly, because he does tell Nova there were plenty of women just came and go. I mean, probably in the scene, but definitely needs to be cut. That's not the point. The point is that it would be interesting to watch this very like apathetic scientist kind of like, and how he gets to that point where it's just like, yeah, no, I'll go on a mission that may be a mission of no return.
Yeah.
Not maybe. Yeah.
Like I'm fine with that.
Like the fact that they ended up back on Earth was an accident. Like they shouldn't have. I do have a headcanon thing that, Paul, I think you'll appreciate, which is Taylor's full name is George Taylor. And so there's a little piece of me that wonders, is this like the Earth 1 version of George Taylor? Because Earth 2 George Taylor was the publisher for the Daily Star, Superman's first job.
Oh, man, that is some pretty deep headcanon right there.
Wow. I was actually bracing myself, and it was as wonderful and terrible as I thought it would be. Yeah. I was like, oh no, he's got a headcanon. Everyone grab onto something. Here it comes.
Yeah, well, so secretly the Planet of the Apes property should have been a DC Elseworld story.
I'm sure we would have treated that franchise with the kinds of dignity and respect we treat our current franchises with on the silver screen. This is what we have to do. We have to pitch. We're going to write it together. The three of us are going to write Taylor, a Planet of the Apes story. And it's going to be like the right stuff, but with a real just prick at the heart of it all. And we're going to have to hire somebody who looks enough like Charlton Heston. Honestly, it can't be that hard. They found one in Brent pretty quick.
That's right.
So I'm sure someone's around, and we're going to get this thing made.
Yeah.
Always do the cold call. You know what I mean?
And then we do a little bit of deep fake to like make him fully just look like Charlton Heston because there's plenty of footage. Like we can make that work.
Man, let's not do that. I'm sure we can find a cookie cutter. His expressions will always be a little dead behind the eyes. Like as much as I like am excited, like, you know, like getting to watch like Luke train someone or show. I don't want to watch a whole series like that. Please don't do that.
That's true. One last thing before we go, we didn't mention this earlier. One reason why Nova would like Taylor that we just never said out loud is he probably smells so much better than every other human in the entire series, and has all of his teeth. Like he very distinctly has all of his teeth, and like you got to imagine that both like sure he's probably pretty dirty. He probably smells terrible to us, but you know what? He doesn't have years of grime built up on his body.
Listen, he went into that lake at the very least. He is semi-ish clean when they first meet. And he has all his teeth. Case, that is such a big one. That is the biggest one, I think. Like, it's like, wow, his teeth are really nice. You know? It's like that song, like, I Love Being a Girl, you know, except it's her being like, you don't have teeth, you have pearls. Like, it's so nice, Taylor. It'll be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So you can see how he'd be in a good position to take over if the Apes hadn't been there. He would have.
Oh, for sure.
He would have been a specimen.
Sure. Yeah, smells better than people. Has all his teeth. Perfect.
I mean, you get the perfect glimpse of that where he's standing there slobbering all over that coconut piece, and he picks Nova right out of that crowd, and he goes, "Yep." And it's funny, like. There's an alternate future where the hunt didn't happen or something and they tamed the world or something like that. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, like they just ended up at a spot that was like not quite close enough to the Ape City and they just built up their society.
And they were fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were fine.
Yeah, or something. Yeah, God, I gotta say, if anyone is listening to this that has not watched this movie recently, I would highly recommend checking it out. We have said multiple times that this franchise hits differently in this era. Like, I think that we as a society have had a reckoning in a lot of ways with racial violence and with inequality in society that this movie is definitely putting a magnifying glass over. And it does it really well. It's very smart about it. It's also fun. Like, the Ape City is a fun place to be, even if it would suck to actually be there. Like, like, Ape Fantasy is so cool. Like, we've got...
Case goes straight to that. I think also a theme that we kind of minorly touched on, but like it definitely also feels very real, like, and still speaks volumes here, is like controlling information, right? And the fact that Dr. Zaius is using a lot of misinformation and half-truths to control the population. And yes, that's presented as theology, and you can totally do the theology, atheist, science argument. But there's also just like, he controls the narrative. He knows the truth, and he only tells his people what they need to know to survive the way that he thinks it's best for them to survive. And I think that there's a lot of discussion in our day and age because we have infinite information, but a lot of the information, half of it is wrong or mischaracterized. And it's really interesting because for Dr. Zaius, there is a control factor of like, well, it's better for people not to know these things, right? And so like, there's an interesting conversation about what keeps a population safe. What information should people have? Is it okay? And like that in an age where like you're living in an age where there's constant misinformation from bots and things that are just pushing out things, theories, and there's conspiracies all over the place and all of that stuff. And we have so much information. It's a really interesting conversation because how wrong or how right is Dr. Zaius under that?
Yeah.
And that's why I don't think of him as a villain. Even though he does villainous things. When you watch the movie, especially in that scene I started talking about right at the beginning when they're doing the closed door meeting, you get the sense that he really believes this. Like, he really believes, I love our way of life. We have a good way of life. Why would we want to screw that up? It's very good for us. It's very good for me specifically, but also like you do get the sense he's working with the chimpanzees. You get the sense he is working with the gorillas to some sense. to some extent. And, maybe you're right. Maybe it is all control, but I don't know. There's something about just the timbre in his voice where he talks about it, where I don't get the feeling that it's malicious necessarily. Maybe it's
right.
Yeah.
Well, it's not like a power grab. It is a paternalistic response to what Sam was saying, like a deluge of information. And even in the 60s, they were starting to deal with that. Like the reason the Vietnam War was not as popular as previous wars is because all of a sudden there was more information getting out there. The fact that you would look at our police departments and see them like beating people who were doing peaceful protests, is an amount of information that was causing fissures in American society. And you can imagine that in a society that has fallen apart because so much information got out there, and even if it was a nuclear war that ultimately was like the pushing point, like it's still the advancement of that society, and then pulling back to a level that you think you can maintain effectively, but having to be, this authoritarian state that locks down like too much progress. Like they can have medicine, but they can't go too fast, and they have to like make sure it doesn't like violate a thing or disprove a thing. Like they're not allowed to go too far into the future, which,
it just makes it interesting, and it's very open-ended. I feel like it's not like, I feel like there are moments where the movie takes like a very staunch, like pro science, bad theology, like this is control, but then it will shift on you, and Dr. Zaius is just like, no, this is the good for all of us. Like we have to break down this cave. Like people can't, like the apes can't know this. Like our society can't know this. This is damaging to us, and so like, it's just, there are themes in this film that if you've never seen it, and we've now ruined everything for you, you should still watch. And if you haven't watched it in a long time, you should go back and watch it, because I think that you will discover new things. Just coming from a perspective of having survived the last 10 years, like you'll just discuss, and that's the testament of this film, is that there's so many themes and so many questions, and it kind of, this entire series really, especially the original 5 movies, I always feel like no one's ever really the hero and no one's ever truly the villain, truly, in all of these movies. I feel like I can always kind of empathize with the villains and with the heroes, and there are times where I feel like the heroes do things that I don't think are right. And I think that overall, from the 5 movies that we watch backwards, that I feel like it's really nice to watch something where like I'm not challenging myself, like being like, oh, that's an anti-hero. It's not an anti-hero. He's a person in this position, and he's just doing stuff, and he's, there's nothing truly black and white about these films. It's all in the gray area.
Yeah, the franchise as a whole has such an absurd name, and every sequel has an even more absurd long title. So long that like it's been issues with like character counts for posts I've made about it, because it's just like Escape from the Planet of the, like it, just to even have the title of the movie we're talking about, it takes up so many characters. But so it feels like it should just be B movie fodder. But the movie, all of these movies, this one especially, but all of these movies have been just so fucking rad. Like every single time we talk about it, there's always something fun to talk about that's really cool that's going on. And there's the fun trappings of the ape stuff, but then the social commentary elements is so much deeper when you spend even a moment like being introspective about it all. It's just such a fucking wild franchise, and it started right here with such a near perfect movie, despite monumental difficulties in actually getting it made and pushback from even the person who fucking wrote it. Like it's incredible that this exists. It's incredible that it is a franchise that has consistently been making movies now for 50 years?
Yeah.
Like 54 years at this point. Like, I mean, I guess going off of when War, which would have been like 49 years since the first one, like, huge swath of time that keeps resonating with people for a reason. And it's so cool that we spent this time talking about it. I'm so glad that we wrapped up our first 150 episodes of the show by doing the 5 in retrospect. And I'm so glad that we had such a wonderful guest for this. So, Paul, give your plugs. Like, where can people find you outside of coming on to talk about 60s properties with us?
Yeah. My brother and I do a podcast a Jack White history program, which we're up to, believe it or not, episode 176 at this point. It's been a long time. It's been about 6 years, but we were really excited because this last year we were included on one of the tour posters for the Jack White solo tour this year. We were called out there, and so we do a lot of cool interviews there. Not a lot of overlap with Planet of the Apes, but we bring on a lot of musicians and things and do that. I also and that's called The Third Men, and we're available every other week usually. And then I produce a Beatle podcast for my father called Yesterday and Today, where we go through the chronological journey of the world's most famous band. And right now we're in the middle of 1984. So Paul's about to launch Give My Regards to Broad Street, which I did mention on the last show that we all got together with the Magical Mystery Tour.
Yeah.
If y'all ever interested in really slicing those film veins open, I'd be happy to come on and talk about Give My Regards to Broad Street. But so that's really interesting. I'm learning a lot about how Michael Jackson wound up purchasing the Beatle catalog, because that's where we are sort of in the story. So really detailed sort of encyclopedic rundown there. And then I also work on 2 other music shows, Now Hear This, which is an album exchange podcast, and Take It Away, which is a Paul McCartney podcast, which we are now starting to do George Harrison albums. We're going to be switching from Paul specifically to solo Beatles in general and go through the George catalog. So a lot of podcasts. You can find me in the pages of DC Comics and Superman and all that fun stuff. That's my day job. And I don't know. I think that's about it. That's all I can plug.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those are quite the plugs.
Yeah.
Hardworking nerd about town, but also multi-time dad. So
I tell you, it's been tough with the kids. As your poor editor will find out. Yeah, but we've been managing. Somehow I manage.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for coming on. It was a blast talking with you about this movie. And yeah, everyone should check out all of that stuff. If you're a Beatles fan, check out the Beatles podcast stuff. If you're a DC Comics fan, check out the DC Comics. It's across the board.
We got an event going on. Got an event going on right now called Lazarus Planet, where a Lazarus volcano explodes. So that's fun for everybody and kind of feels a little Planet of the Apes-ish. So there's that. Do that.
Yeah.
Read that.
But after they are done supporting all of those things, Sam, where can they find you?
They can find me here on Another Pass every other week. And then they can sometimes find me on our Discord if I remember it exists. Other than that, I'm just walking through the desert trying to find a mysterious lake to take a bath in. And so I will not be available. But if you have any complaints about anything I said, as always, you can find Case at...
You can beat your chest in my direction on Twitter at the moment, as long as it exists, at Case Aiken. At other socials that are popping up like Hive and whatnot, I'm also doing the at Case Aiken. Or you can find me on Instagram at Quetzalcoatl5, because I'm a Legion of Superheroes nerd and also a mythology nerd, and I've been hanging on to that goddamn screen name since the AIM days. So that one's staying the way it is. You can find the podcast on Twitter at Another Pass, and you can find us to actually chat on the aforementioned Discord server, which you can get a link to at our website, certainpov.com, or just all over the place. We share it. Like, I believe it's in my bio on Twitter. Like, come interact with us on Discord, because we have a lot of great times chatting about a lot of fun subjects. We have more shows joining the network, which have opened up some really cool conversations. Like we recently added Jukebox Vertigo, which is a Spotify building podcast, where each episode, which is bi-weekly, they like add stuff to the playlist, which is a lot of fun based on like a category for that week. We also have a show that just came back off of hiatus, which is United States of Women, where Elizabeth and Jessica each week go through notable women from specific states going in the order that the state joined the Union. So they started with Delaware, and they've worked their way across. Currently, they're in Massachusetts, talking about influential women that history often overlooks, because history likes to focus on the other gender and like not really valuing the contributions that half of our population have given. And this is a really good historical breakdown of why these people have been important. So check that out. And Yeah, and then circle back here for our next episode. We are done talking about the Planet of the Apes movies for the moment.
We are?
Yeah.
What? Why?
Well, because the Matt Reeves movies are great.
Fine.
And we already talked about the Burton one.
Yeah.
Fair. So we are going to go to what was supposed to be our next episode until we decided to do this whole thing. Sam, do you care to tell the audience what that is?
Absolutely, I would love to. Next time we'll be doing Planet of the Apes. No, I'm joking. Next time we'll be doing Highlander 2, The Quickening. But until then, if you enjoyed this, pass it on.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Another Pass is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Sam Alicea and Case Aiken. The show is edited by Matt Storm. Our logo and episode art is by Case Aiken. Our intro theme is by Vin Macri, and our outro theme is by Matt Brogan.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.